the nice thing about writing an OER is you're not writing like lots and lots and lots of things. You know, I mean, you still are writing, but you're writing for a way that's meant to be, you know, easier for most people to read and understand, right? So, you know, when you think of a word, even like epidemiology or drug use and misuse, you know, maybe you go to something like, oh, that sounds like a book that might be challenging, when no, we want it to be something that's easy for everyone to access and read.
Christy Bazan, thanks so much for coming to the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning to talk about open educational resources. What you've had a good experience with that because you've done one of our first OERs through the library here on campus, right?
I have. Yeah. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first question, how did you get started with an open educational resource? Why didn't you just buy a textbook?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that back when I first got hired here, it was a pivotal time for the course that I was going to be teaching, drug use and misuse. And there was an opportunity for us to acquire some funds to put together an open education resource. And so we went ahead and kind of applied for those, got them. And then we started working on the OER, and that in itself helped us to kind of bring our course together as well. So we were writing the book alongside developing the course and really sort of blowing up the class that we had and wanting to make it more current and relevant to students.
Yeah. And you had shared with me, I mean, it's open, it's drug use and misuse, a public health.
A community health
perspective.
Right.
So there are things sort of out there, but they're expensive and kind of old-fashioned feeling.
We really wanted to modernize it and also be able to have a little local flavor too, you know, in the sense of including things around social determinants and, you know, looking at what's happening on college campuses and, you know, talk about other aspects of, you know, protective factors and other factors that influence drug use and misuse. So, you know, we had quite a few of us. There was 4 authors working on this text, and it was great to have everybody's lens, you know, coming into play. And, you know, I was kind of the lead as far as these are the titles of the chapters. And then we went and sought out experts who could write around that content area.
Yeah, no, Brandy Barnes, Ryan Santins, Emily Verone, right?
Right, yeah, all of those.
And they're all some grad school or just out of grad school, so the sense of, you know, kind of young perspective and fresh take on the discipline. And
absolutely. And they were also, you know, I mean, well connected to the field or interested in studying that further. So that really, you know, solidified kind of the rationale for why we hired them, and some of them had taught for us in AHS. And so they were, you know, qualified. And, you know, that's sort of how you kind of form your teams in these writing strategies, like who's here now, who may be interested, you know, and who also has the expertise, which is really critical too.
Yeah. And then you were just sharing with me earlier that, I mean, you were one of the first on campus through the IOPN. I mean, we should talk about what's the IOPN, the Illinois Open Public Network,
right?
Yeah.
And so through Sarah Benson and her efforts, we had some funding that we were able to get through the state for that initial OER. And since the university has secured a lot more funding for open education development or resource development, and that's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an initial, you know, pot of money, and it's you know, it's a substantial amount of money for a lot of the young writers that we had, and even adjunct faculty members who might be working on it, or summer salary or things like that. So, you know, we're not making millions off of this, but we're saving that kind of money for our students, which is, you know, more of, I think, the goal that we have with open education resources is, one, not only to help, you know, maybe put our own flavor on a book, or to make it look at things from the lens we're looking at, you know, to educate our students, but also, yes, to help them, you know, save their dollars, right? By being able to have this accessible and free to them, oftentimes embedded in the course or linked PDF. It has a lot of accessibility aspects. So, you know, there's not a hindrance for anyone who's trying to use it. But, you know, we also think about with the OERs just, that it can also be used elsewhere. Like it doesn't have to just be here at the University of Illinois. So we've seen a couple other, universities pick it up. I think I spoke with Sarah a couple semesters ago at a conference about this, and there was at least 2 other institutions who were using it.
Nice.
So those are great things for the campus community, students. Yeah.
No, so, and I guess we should let folks know, remind them about the open educational resources. I mean, one way is to use like Creative Commons and agreements. So basically as an author, you're saying, hey, I like this stuff. It's my work, but I'm doing it to save my own students some money and to do good quality work that ties into my class. But then you go ahead and say, hey, other institutions, other people can use this text.
They sure can. And they can, by having a Creative Commons, they could adopt parts of it, or they could sort of change parts of it. So, the flavor of the drug use and misuse book is really connected a lot to, things that are available in our field, pretty open access. So like the CDC and, SAMHSA and the National Institutes of Health and, other health related areas. That's easy for us to find good information that's relevant and appropriate. So, and then of course our own writings and our own, knowledge, but, that doesn't necessarily mean we have experience even with the topic, right? If you think about it from a use perspective. So, but a lot of us have a lot of knowledge around what it's like for individuals who are dealing with drug use and misuse situations.
Yeah. And then the format of we say text and we think old school, paper and pictures and words. This is an online, interactive, open educational resource, and just some of the interactive elements there, and maybe some of the things you've heard from your own students about how they use this online textbook to learn and do that.
And you can still print it off in a PDF, and it kind of has that flavor of a book, but it really is more meant to be interactive using it online, right? So I happen to embed each chapter into each module that I'm using it in. Yeah. And so the students would be reading the book while they're in the module, right? They don't really have to even go outside of the course, which is nice when you're using your own OER, or when you're using any OER. If you want to embed it, you can, and that makes it easier for the students, right? So that they're not like going in all sorts of places for the materials. But the book has a lot of interactive components. We call it HP5 content, and that content is either self-developed or integrated, from YouTube, something like a CDC video on caffeine or whatever it might be. But there could be matching sections, drag and drop, self-checks, or, things for understanding, check for understandings, drag and drop the little parts of, you mentioned the neurotransmitter, labeling the neurotransmitter or the parts of the brain, right, where drugs might impact it. No,
I was just exploring the text just an hour ago, and, I keep up on TED Talks and things like that. I think I know stuff, but you had this great video from, how do drugs affect the brain? So short little video is great. And it's TED Lessons. And it's like, I didn't know that. So I subscribed to the TED Lessons. So I'm just thinking, okay, I think maybe that happens with students, right? So that idea of, there's a lot of stuff on the web and millions and billions of things, but for librarians and academics, sometimes we want to curate and point students in the right direction. And that usually works pretty well for the students' learning and their path.
Oh, it does. And all of my evaluations have been really good in this class. And I think that also just the comments I shared, I think a few with you guys a little bit about just how students really appreciate the fact that the book is free, right? And they also like the interactivity of the book, and they've had really good experiences with it. And it's like available to them on the first day. There's no stopping them from, moving forward or accessing it. And when they have trouble, I'm able to remedy it like really quickly, or message them the link, or send them the PDF, or do whatever's necessary, versus like, oh, I have to wait for my financial aid to get my money to go buy my book. And then 3 weeks into an 8-week course, they're like, I just got the book, and they're already that far behind with the discussions and everything else. Or, historically, if a student couldn't get a book, I would maybe lend them mine, just so that they could have access to it. And ever since I moved in this direction with these large classes, because we're talking 100, 200, 300, 400 students in some of these classes. Right. So $1,000 to be saved but I wouldn't have thousands of copies to give. You know what I mean?
Right.
But now
Yeah.
with my OER, it's so accessible. It's very easy for them to access. And there's even other good ones out there too that I sometimes recommend, especially those that are maybe students taking the drug use and misuse class as part of this class would help you become a PT or a doctor or go to medical school. And they'll want to meet with me and talk with me more about drugs because they're really interested in it.
Yeah.
And then I could say, oh, here's some other OERs that you could look at that might help you, better understand things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a testament that you're onto something that's working for you, because you told me you're already working on your second OER on epidemiology.
Right. So we have a new one coming out of AHS called Epidemiology, a primer. And there's quite a few faculty members that are working on that. And we started working on it over the summer. So about 7-8 chapters. We're kind of doing a similar in regards to we have a course online, and we're trying to match that course or even maybe change that a little bit or change, sort of let's see how the OER comes together and then what do we want the course to become? Because, we have to update our classes. Can't just keep doing the same thing you've done for 30 years. So, we want to make sure that our classes are meeting student needs, not just in the resources that we use in the courses, but also in the lectures and in the videoing and the interactivity and the discussions and different things like that make the course really rich.
Yeah. All right. So last thing from me, I'm a colleague and I heard you do these OER things, and I'm curious, but then I say, well, but I'm kind of a little nervous. I've never done something like this. I hear there's a grant, but I'm just, I'm so busy. I don't know if I have time. But it's a good cause. Convince me.
Well, first off, I would forward you the email that we just got from iOpen to say like, hey, the grant's open again, apply, right? And it's not really that hard to apply, but you do have to have an idea. So I think these ideas sometimes come together, with your other colleagues when you're chatting about things. And so that's how it happened with both the drug use and misuse class and the epidemiology class or course, OERs that we have. We would just, kind of talk about, I think we should do this. And I would say for my colleagues, we are rooted in, we wanted to save students money because we're teaching hundreds of students, right? So there's something there to benefit them. And so we would just kind of, all right, let's get together a team, let's figure it out and apply for the funding. And, typically, we haven't run into any barriers, right? I'm sure there might be, but there weren't any for us. And we would just plan the writing to be, succinct. The nice thing about writing an OER is you're not writing like lots and lots and lots of things. You still are writing, but you're writing for a way that's meant to be, easier for most people to read and understand, right? So, when you think of a word, even like epidemiology or drug use and misuse, maybe you go to something like, oh, that sounds like a book that might be challenging, when no, we want it to be something that's easy for everyone to access and read. So the writing is usually, kind of how you speak.
Yeah.
And that makes it really easy to write. And then we have divided ours up into, all right, what's your area of expertise? Or here's the title, here's the chapter titles, who wants to write what. So, anywhere from 1 to 5 people could easily be on a team. And then you divide up the resources according to the work you do.
No, I love that. And I think you're hitting a key point, a subtle point here. So the teamwork, go with the team, and then the library and the support through the program, there's support, you've got help, right? So, but then you're hitting this key point, I think, that maybe the for-profit textbooks that are written to be used around the country are big and bloated and overwritten because they need to include everything. Whereas if you're designing open educational resource for your students in your course, in your department, on your campus, you're fine-tuning it for just what you need, right?
I think that's, what's most beneficial to using an OER is you can tailor it, right?
Yeah.
And there's been so many times in my career where I would be like, oh, I love this book, but I only want to use one chapter, or, and to go through the links of all of that. And I feel like it especially in the public health realm, which is where, I'm rooted and come from, there's so many good public health things in lots of different places. So how could my colleagues and I bring those things together to make them more accessible and, relatable and usable, instead of, oh, I'm using this book and this book and this book, and then you have a stack of books and you're like, I don't even remember what I'm using from what book, right? But somehow, how do we bring that all together? And an OER is a great idea, because it can bring so many things together into one spot, and it's a lot easier to use. It's very accessible. And it comes together and it looks really cool too. And it's very interactive, and we've got the cover design that kind of, can have, oh, we like that or we don't like that. The colors, what colors, how do we have the headings? How do we want the chapter to lay out? It just really comes together so well. We had 6 different writers for the epidemiology and 4 different writers for the drugs. And you wouldn't really know it because we just kind of, it just comes together so naturally.
Yeah. You're proud of it.
I am.
Can tell.
I am. And so are my colleagues. I'm very proud to have worked with them on these because it's an exciting thing for us.
Yeah. Christy, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.